Hello and welcome back to Azure Terraformer. It is another Azure Terraform Community Call. Now, this was my first day back from a holiday that I took overseas, so I was pretty slammed today, so I was unable to join. But I thought I would hop on, watch the recording, share my reaction with you about all the great stuff that's coming out from the actual Azure Terraform team at Microsoft. So without further ado, let's get started.
Awesome. I just updated that, but I guess it didn't want to show May, or it showed May still. Welcome everybody to the community call for August. There have been some changes to this format, so I'm going to keep it a little more bare bones. I'm just going to skip around a bit. One of the main things that, in case that we've changed, is this is a recurring meeting now. You should have gotten an invite for a series, and this should recur on the third Thursday of every month at this time. It's a decision that the team made just because we felt like when we were not necessarily feeling like there was an hour's worth of content to cover, or a speaker who could come on for 30 minutes, it just kind of caused things to drag a bit. But we want you to still be able to have a direct line with us, to be able to chat with us, and to be able to bring your own agenda items even to the meeting. Of course, we're always welcoming presenters, but if you just want to ask a question, we're hoping that that open format will be a little less stressful, or a little less, just more straightforward experience. So cool things just about the team in case you haven't joined one of these before. Our team that Mark and myself work on, and Mark will talk in a bit. It'll be
Mark Gray, not Mark me.
the Azure deployments team. Our real goal is to make Azure the platform of choice for everybody. And we are making sure that we make a frictionless and high quality experience for folks to basically succeed on any of their tools. So our team owns ARM templates, Bicep, Terraform, and we actually don't really mind if you use Bicep or you use Terraform. ARM templates is a little outdated nowadays, so if it's new stuff, we probably recommend you use one of the other tools. But overall, we are saying that you can be set up for success on either. And we believe that there is a big benefit to all of that.
Basically, Stephen Ma and Mark Gray represent the Azure Client Tools group. So any client application, client tool that provisions stuff to Azure, that's kind of in their wheelhouse. And they want to make that the best experience possible. Terraform is one of those tools. And interestingly, Terraform is the only third-party tool that actually has attention from this group at Microsoft. So I think that also goes to show Microsoft's commitment to this, to the Terraform community, which I, of course, think is awesome. So good.
Other than that, there are a few ways that this community was formed. We mainly just wanted to make sure that everybody felt prioritized and included within the feedback for product future and vision. And some of the ways that we're currently investing in that effect is, of course, joining the community. We also want you to be participants within the Slack. So make sure to join the Slack if you haven't. You can sign up to present. These are going to be monthly. So if there's a certain month that you want to do, we welcome you, and you can just talk about some stuff that you're looking to share with the community. We have blog posts, so we have the latest updates on stuff that's coming out. I know we haven't had one recently. We're in the middle of getting that this month / the beginning of next. So if you want to follow the community call recordings or any other YouTube, then we will go ahead and do that. And then Twitter and X is a great way to make sure that we share a bunch of stuff.
Definitely join the Slack. I've met some pretty cool people on there. The Slack is definitely focused on the Azure RM provider, and I think it's great that Microsoft is doing that in an official capacity. There is also a Slack that's run by HashiCorp for Azure Terraform, which is mainly for the provider developers. So if you want to contribute to the provider, that's another Slack that you want to go to. And you could also join the Azure Terraformer Discord server, which is something that I've set up. It's not official for Microsoft. It's just part of the Azure Terraformer channel. And I felt like I wanted to kind of expand the lens or to widen the aperture, so to speak. And so in the Azure Terraformer Discord, you might be asking yourself, well, why do we need an Azure Terraformer Discord when there's an Azure Terraform Slack? The Azure Terraformer Discord is largely around Azure and Terraform, but it also brings in all sorts of other tools that are kind of tangential. So GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps Pipelines, Ansible, Kubernetes, etc. So there's lots of different channels for all those different tangential tools and technologies that people that are doing Azure and Terraform together might find useful as well. So I'm on all of them. So I encourage you to join the Azure Terraform Community Slack. Also hop on my Azure Terraformer Discord server. Join all the things. Each kind of has its own vibe. I think my Discord server is just a little bit less formal, I'd say.
Torkel, we can definitely share the slides, but right now I'm about to hand it over to Mark, and I think after that, we don't actually have slides for the remainder of the deck today. To be honest, I'm reusing an old deck from a few months back. So
He totally was. It said May 2024 on the first slide. So no.
With all that being said,
we don't like
I
slides
think
anyway.
we'll hand it over to Mark, and I don't know if Mark, you wanted to share about anything in particular with the Copilot, but the floor is all yours.
Awesome. I wanted to give folks kind of an overview of the Copilot work that we have released. There was a question in Slack after I put the announcement up there, so I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of kind of what we've done and give you a kind of an overview of where we're going and our timelines and stuff. Kind of a give you an idea of where we are right now. We released the Terraform support in the Azure Copilot, and I'll show you what that means and how you can access it and all that stuff in just a minute. But we've done kind of a limited preview of it where it is available to everybody, but we haven't put a big announcement out there letting everyone know. We just community know, and we're hoping that you can use the Copilot and give us feedback on that so we can make improvements going forward.
Cool. So basically, it's kind of like a soft launch of this feature. So I actually haven't used the Azure Copilot yet, so kind of interested in seeing how that works. I of course use ChatGPT all the time whenever I'm coding. It's just one of my go-to things, one of my go-to tools, right? It's kind of replaced Bing or Google, right? I look things up on ChatGPT. And then if I can't get a coherent response, then I'll go look for something on Google. I think it's only natural that we're going to start seeing Terraform-oriented Copilot features. So excited to see what they have to say.
From a timeline perspective, we are targeting the October-November timeframe to do a public preview where we kind of broadly announce the functionality.
Around HashiConf time, makes sense.
And at that point, we'll have new features and functionality and better quality for the handler at that point. One of the other things that I want to make sure that everyone is aware of and comfortable with on this call is hopefully you feel comfortable just jumping off of mute. Don't feel like you have to follow up with questions offline or anything like that. This should be an interactive call. So if you have questions at any point, especially when Stephen and I are kind of presenting stuff, feel free to jump off and ask any questions. So
I always, when I join this call, I try and come on video. I always feel kind of weird, like, because it's not my call and I'm not a presenter, but like I come on video to try and be like yet another, like just another person coming on video. Because I wish more people came on video on this call. I mean, look at this. We have like 60, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 78, 80, 82, 84, 86. We have 86 Azure Terraformers on this call, right? Like this should be a big party, you know? So I do hope people start coming on video, like unmuting, and we get, you know, a little bit more engagement from the audience. So hats off to Mark and Stephen for trying to encourage that. So if you join these calls, I challenge you, come on video, man. Come on video. It's pretty cool. You know, you got Stephen Ma and you got Mark Gray there. These guys are the product team basically for Azure and for Azure Terraform. So, getting to meet with them face to face on a monthly basis, that's amazing. So take advantage of it. Come on video and, you know, treat it like it's a real meeting. I think that'd be really cool.
With that, I'll spend a few minutes here showing you the Copilot functionality that we have added, how you access it and all that kind of stuff. So I will share my screen here real quick. If I can find the right screen. All right. So let me know if you can see my screen all right. All right. So we have added Terraform code generation to the Azure Copilot. If you go to the Microsoft Copilot in Azure marketing name there, you can see kind of the information about what Copilot is, what it does. And one of the things you can see here is the enhanced scenarios. And we have added information in the enhanced scenario here about Terraform. So you can see that you can actually generate Terraform infrastructure or Terraform code from the Copilot. And this gives you an overview of what we can do, what the limitations are, and some sample prompts and stuff like that. So you can get an idea. Structure or Terraform code from the Copilot. And this gives you an overview of what we can do, what the limitations are, and some sample prompts.
So the sample prompts are: create a Terraform config for cognitive services instance with name my cognitive service and S0 pricing tier. Or show me a Terraform configuration for a Linux VM with 8 gigs of RAM, an image Ubuntu server 1804 LTS. The resource should be in West US location, public IP address. Additionally, should be part of a virtual network with a network security group. Okay. Create Terraform configuration for container app resource with name my app with quick start image. Add a log analytic workspace. The per gigabyte 2018 SKU, and set the retention days to 31. That's kind of weird. 31, not 30. Interesting. Enable single revision mode in the container app and set the CPU and memory limit to 2 and 4 gigabyte respectively. Also set the name of the container app environment to awesome Azure Env and set the name of the container to my quick start container. So it's extremely prescriptive. I assume that's what Mark Gray is talking about, where, you know, he's saying it's going to get better, it's going to get more accurate. That each of these, one thing that I notice about these prompts is that each of them is very specific about valid values, right? Like log analytics workspace. I know the SKU, and there is a magic string per GB 2018 that you have to use, and it's cased just like that. S0 pricing tier, right? So that tells me Like maybe it's not smart enough to just say with a common, with the standards, with the most common SKU, right, or the least expensive SKU, right, or try and use the free tier, right, or something like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure S0 is the free tier, so that's kind of interesting. Also, the names kind of freak me out. Like it, they're very specific about the name of the resource. I don't know how I feel about that. And then, what is the Terraform code for Databricks? So each of these prompts, they use different verbiage to basically ask for code. Create an OpenAI deployment with ChatGPT, blah blah blah. They're basically asking for code. Interesting. I guess we'll see how this works
and stuff like that. So you can get an idea of what you can accomplish with that right now. The way that you actually have access to the functionality is by clicking on the Copilot button up here. I don't know what the exact stats are for that right now, but it's available to the vast majority of customers at this point. And unless your organization has decided not to, if it's exposed to you, you have Copilot up here, you click Copilot, it opens the side pane here.
Go check it out. See if you have access to this Copilot, and let me know in the comments below.
And then we are integrated with the Copilot. So if you ask anything that has anything to do with Terraform, it's going to actually pop up and give you the code for that. And I'll show you that here real quick. So if I just take one of my sample prompts here, and
those look like the same prompts as before.
Paste it in here. You can see that if I ask it to do a OpenAI deployment using ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo and the specific model ID, and run that, what happens is Azure Copilot has a bunch of different skills or handlers there, and what it's doing is going through and parsing the question and determining which handler it needs to pass it to. You can see here that it sees that it's a Terraform question, so it passes it to our handler or our skill, and then our skill takes it over from there, takes the question and goes and generates a configuration. And I have opened a bug on this, but there's some weird behavior here in dark mode. I should have fixed that before demoing, but we give an overview, kind of here's answer to your question. We give a summary of what the configuration has in it here, and then we give you the configuration here on the right-hand side. And this is a full working configuration for Terraform.
So it looks like it's generating code that's basically all in one file, because you're going to have to copy pasta this into VS Code, and it's all going to be in one file. I presume that's what we're going to see Mark Gray here,
including variables and all that kind of stuff. Right now, the option that you have is to take that configuration. You can look at it in here and do what you want to in there, but essentially what most customers will do is copy that configuration, paste it in VS Code, and then kind of go from there. But it gives you a really good starting point for the configuration, and you can see here that in Visual Code with the Terraform extension installed, I'm not getting any red squigglies here. So this is valid Terraform code, so you can be comfortable knowing that you're not going to have to go tweak things and add properties and fix all that kind of stuff.
Now, I mean, this makes sense. Like they might be limited by the GUI of that little slice, right? So you got one text box that you can output this code in. You're going to be very limited. Like you can't follow like file conventions that I follow on this channel and others follow, where you kind of split up different, right? So we right off the bat, we got our provider there. We got a bunch of variables, and then presumably some resources. If we were to set this up from scratch, we would have a variables.tf and all the variables would be in there. We would have a versions.tf. That is interesting. I don't see a required providers block. I just see a provider block. So maybe that's an omission. Might want to include a required providers block. And another thing that kind of sticks out to me is that all of these input variables have defaults. So that can be kind of a good thing from a simplicity standpoint, because basically, like, I could just go run Terraform apply right now in the terminal from this code file, and I wouldn't have to input any variables, right? However, is it a good idea to have defaults for like the resource group name that presumably you're provisioning, or, the location? I talk about this a lot on the channel. You don't want to set defaults if you want the consumer of your module to think about what the value of that input variable should be. Ideally, you would set the values in a TFR file that aren't like secret or sensitive in any way, and you would omit defaults, unless there's a sane default. I would even go so far as, like, for the SKU. Another thing that I think is a little bit overdone is all these names, right? And we'll probably see this in the code later. And this is one of those patterns that's very common in ARM templates that I never understood, right? They pass in these names. Like, you pass in the name for every resource. That seems like an unnecessary thing to do. You probably see on my channel, like, one of the most common things that I do is I always construct the names using a naming convention within my Terraform modules. Now, and I do that for my root module. Now, if you're going to have a reusable module, of course, you don't want to kind of tightly couple to that naming convention. So you probably want to pass in like a name that has that built into it. Yeah, this is a very ARM template-y kind of vibe, where every resource that you're going to provision has like a name input variable where you have to pass in the name of it. I'm not a fan. I've never been a fan of that writing ARM templates, and trust me, like, since I've been doing Terraform, it's one of those ARM template conventions that I've thrown out the window. So that would be one suggestion that I would say is get rid of that, because in Terraform, the TF files, you're maintaining configuration. So it's okay to hard code strings in TF files. Now, if you're a C# developer or a Java developer, or traditional developer, you're going to be like, hard code a string? Oh no. You got to have a global for that, something like that. No, man, like, infrastructure as code is different. Okay. Infrastructure as code is literally the configuration, like the same object-oriented principles, that are and would be good practices for a traditional programming language are not the same. So the idea that every attribute should be set using some input variable or local is not the right approach. So I would much rather see less noise in the input variables that get output. And really, I mean, it's good that they have input variables, but probably only have input variables that are meaningful, like the location or the SKU. All these naming variables, just get rid of those and apply some naming convention. That'd be one thing that I would recommend.
The other thing that you'll see here is that we provide the provider block as well as variables. So we're not just giving you static text in the resources themselves.
Now you can see here, like, so some of these are being passed in as variables, but some are, like the kind attribute on that cognitive account, is being set as a hard-coded string. So I would just say, like, there should be more so hard-coded strings, especially the way that this is outputting, Terraform code. There's no expectation that this is going to be like highly normalized Terraform module, right? So I would say, extract so many and how they would update the AI model to know what a meaningful input variable would be or not. But that's one thing that I'd recommend.
We give you some good variables in here, and we will work on kind of tweaking the kind of level of variables we use versus the static values. But right now you can kind of see that the vast majority of these are either.
So my point, I mean, this picture right here makes my point. The whole point of infrastructure as code is you want to be able to look at it and see and know what it's doing. I can't do that with all of these input variables extracted. All of these values are extracted out into input variables. So now, I have to go look at those input variables, to know what they are, right? Now, if you want to change the skew dynamically, make it an input variable. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is, if this thing is just exporting Terraform code, I would say readability would be more important than having all the variables output there. Less opinionated input variables, and then because the expectation is I'm going to copy pasta this into VS Code, which we saw Mark Gray do, and I'm going to refactor it, right? So make it easier on me to refactor it by making it easy for me to read and understand what's going on here. So these extra layers of abstraction are just kind of slowing me down from a readability standpoint. That's my 2 cents.
Implicit references or variables, but you can take that and go from there and actually run that configuration. But you can see that you get a good valid configuration that has some best practices from a variable and Terraform coding perspective included in it, so you can actually use that to get started. We have done some customer interviews and got some feedback on kind of the experience that we have so far, and are working on improving different aspects of this experience. One of the asks that we have, as you can probably, first thing that came to your mind is this kind of side panel experience is not ideal for this code, where customers can't really see a lot of the code, and kind of that experience is terrible. So we're looking at ways that we can improve that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if they could make that Copilot panel have a maximized mode or something like that, I think that would be better. Or heck, why not launch this code into a GitHub code space or something like that, where you could have multiple files at that point. I think that might be a more compelling experience. The JSON export tool that's embedded across the Azure portal doesn't do that, right? It has mechanisms where you could actually deploy the ARM template just with the click of a button. That might be an interesting feature, right? I don't know if that goes into Copilot, or if this would be more about repackaging this capability of generating code, into a feature that's similar to that ARM template export tool that we have. Maybe that ARM template export tool has a tab where it's okay, I don't want to export it as ARM, I want to export it as Terraform. And when you're on the Terraform export tab, then there's a button that says deploy to Azure, and that executes Terraform, apply. That would be pretty interesting. And I think would fall within the realm of the BSL license, because we're not charging customers for it. It's free. It's not a competitive offering to Terraform Cloud, right? It's literally no different than just, setting up a GitHub action and running Terraform apply, So, yes, you are embedding the Terraform CLI, in some container that gets executed when you smash that deploy to Azure button. But it seems like it would be, well within the BSL, well within the bounds of the BSL license. That's my take.
In before the public preview, so that you can actually have an experience where you can actually see all the code and get a better experience there, and maybe ask some follow-up questions and what have you. You can ask some follow-up questions. So if you want to change and ask a follow-up question, you can do that. As I showed you before, when you ask that follow-up question, Azure Copilot is going to try to route that question appropriately. So it's going to go back to Azure Copilot, and it may or may not come back to our handler. I think they've made some improvements there, so it is fairly good at that. But you can kind of have that multi-turn conversation with this and add stuff to the configuration or kind of fix things or what have you. One of the things to keep in mind there is that the way that we currently work is if you ask a follow-up question, like you want to kind of change one of the values or something like that, you can ask that follow-up question, but the handler will essentially recreate the code. So we don't have a way currently of saying, oh, you wanted to update this one resource. So we'll just update that one resource. We actually regenerate all of the code. So you may end up with a completely different sample. So just keep that in mind as you have kind of those multi-turn conversations here.
That's, pretty par for the course from just using ChatGPT web client, right? Oftentimes it'll regenerate the whole answer for you, right? So that sounds pretty normal. That is a bit unfortunate. I think, but there's really no way around that unless you build in, some targeting features, to target specific areas that you want to regenerate. Yeah, I think those types of features will come eventually, but they're honestly the way that we interact with ChatGPT is rather primitive today. It will get better, I'm sure.
The other thing that we want to do and would love your feedback on is to understand what you would want to do with this code after it's generated in the portal. So is copy and paste in VS Code or whatever your editor of choice okay, or would you want some other mechanism to have a button down here that says send this to a file, download this to a file, or what have you? So any feedback that you have there would be super helpful as well.
I mean, my feedback right off the bat, I've said this before, is launch a GitHub code space. I mean, that like seems like perfect to me. Because within a GitHub code space, I would imagine, we could embed a dev container that has Terraform installed, right? And then we can start executing Terraform apply. We would just you'd have to figure out how to give that GitHub code space, the identity, the user logged into Azure's identity so that it could run Terraform apply and actually do something with it. But yeah, GitHub code spaces would be perfect for this. Or just, in addition to, I don't want to say get rid of the chat interface, but what I'd like to see is generate code for existing resources, right? The way that Mark prompted Copilot here was with a question of like, hey, write me some Terraform code, right? I can go into ChatGPT and I can do that, right? Write me an OpenAI deployment using Terraform, right? And it'll basically produce the code that he produced there. I think the power of the Azure Copilot would be presumably the Azure Copilot knows what resource group I'm on, or it knows what panel I'm looking at within the Azure portal, I would presume. So if I'm in the context of a resource group, and I say export this resource group, so that I can import all these resources into a Terraform workspace, that would be really powerful, right? Working with the existing resources, I think that would be really cool. Another thing, which doesn't even exist yet, but I've been pushing for this feature where ARM and Bicep deployment, basically ARM deployments, when you deploy like an ARM template, there's a record within the deployments tab within the Azure portal. I would love to see Terraform be promoted as part of that deployments experience. Shouldn't be super hard to do. Basically, you would, because of the way that Terraform provisions resources in Azure, each resource is going to come in as a separate API call. So it's not batched up like an ARM template is, where it's like one deployment. But this is not a Herculean effort. Did I say that right? Herculean effort, Herculean effort, where that can't be overcome, right? All we'd need, all that the ARM control plane would have to do is, and the Azure Terraform provider would have to do is, when you run Terraform apply, associate a GUID, like for the deployment ID, for every ARM API request that happens, as basically like a correlation identifier, right? So that on the back end, ARM can see, oh, all of these API requests came in with this deployment ID correlation identifier. That's one deployment, right? That would be a nice thing. That would then give us interesting information for a Terraform Copilot experience, where we could ask questions about, is there drift, from this current, what's in this current resource group? Is there drift from the last deployment that was made, right? That might be interesting. Another thing that would be interesting is if we're doing that deployment model with Terraform, in that deployment, provide a reference to where the state file is. Presumably that's somewhere on Azure as well, right? And the Terraform Copilot, it knows about the deployment, it knows about the resource group, and it knows about the state file. You can Splunk all of that data and get lots of information about drift and things that are out of sync, things that didn't work, things that are missing, potential hidden features that are not under Terraform management that have been enabled, that Terraform doesn't know about. These would be really interesting things to have. But you would need deeper integration into the ARM deployment model to be able to do that. I hope we get there someday, but today we're not there. Today we're not there.
And that is pretty much the overview from a Copilot perspective. We hope you can try it out and can kind of get some benefit out of it. And if you have any feedback, please do provide feedback. So the way that you provide feedback here is, once you ask the question, if you like the response, you can give it a like. If you don't like the response, you can dislike. So if you like it, you can tell it why or what was good about it and provide some details if you want, and then hit submit. We check this on a regular basis, so your feedback will be looked at. So you can send responses or feedback to us through the Slack community, but doing it this way will give us a better way of tracking it, and the developers will see it and all that kind of stuff too. So you can choose your way of providing your feedback, and we can work with you on that. So
yeah, it's basically like the Tesla FSD disengagement button, where anytime I have to jerk the wheel on my Tesla Model Y, it prompts me, hey, send your feedback directly to Elon. I smash that button. I say, Elon, make your car drive better. I can say whatever I want to say, and then presumably Elon's there, in my own head, like listening to me complain about his car. I'm just kidding. I'm a very happy Tesla owner, but it's kind of the same idea, right? Like it's a more automated, more efficient way of capturing feedback at scale. And I'm sure Elon's not listening to it. I'm sure there's some speech to text thing that's like processing my voice, and like then there's some machine learning algorithm like capturing it and all this stuff, creating training models. So, but yeah, you get the idea. In this case, we potentially have humans reading this stuff. So that's interesting for sure.
All right. Any questions anyone has?
I see Alex,
Alex?
is all.
Do you guys have any intention on making like a VS Code extension for this?
We do. Yeah.
Okay.
We have so we're looking at ways to provide kind of this functionality where you are. That's another one of the pieces of feedback that we've had in customer interviews is they work in VS Code. So going to the portal to get these hints and then going back to VS Code would be kind of a pain. So we're looking at ways to expose this functionality in VS Code as well. And that's something that we're hoping to do in that same time frame, that public preview time frame, but if not, shortly after that.
See, that's why I feel like this Copilot thing, the way that it should differentiate itself from the GitHub Copilot is that it should be operating off of existing resources. That's it. If I'm going to be generating code from scratch, then I'm going to be doing that from VS Code. Well, let's think about that, right? When would I be generating code from scratch, but I would want to do it within the context of my Azure environment? I guess in that case, it would be like if I'm referencing other resources in Azure that are existing, but maybe I want to create a new deployment. So maybe I got some VNets that are already provisioned, and I'm like, hey, go create this storage account, add it to this private network. The private network's in this resource group and that resource group. Make me code from that. Then that saves me the time of doing the research to figure out, getting all the little bits and pieces of the data that I need in order to, to create the input parameters to actually, attach that storage account to that existing network. I think that makes sense, right? But I think just creating completely new Terraform code that is detached from all existing Azure resources, I think that belongs in GitHub Copilot. Azure Copilot, I think, should really be like its killer feature, its killer app is going to be tapping into existing resources that are in Azure, that are in the Azure portal, that are in your subscriptions, that are within context of the Azure Copilot. That makes sense to me. And I think that creates a clear delineation between when you'd use GitHub Copilot, which doesn't have access to the Azure portal, right? Which doesn't know about your Azure subscriptions or any of the VNets you provisioned, but the Azure Copilot would, right? Or should, I would think. So, yeah.
Cool.
The one, not concern, but thing that we have to, or one of the things we have to work through there is the GitHub Copilot, and we don't want to have the GitHub Copilot and whatever Copilot experience we have in VS Code kind of stepping on each other's toes. So we've started working with the GitHub Copilot team to make sure that we provide a good experience there.
Absolutely. I mean, GitHub Copilot is about the developer experience and creating things from scratch. The Azure Copilot experience should be either an operator experience, like tying into the deployments and the state, and what's provisioned, where the drift is. That would be beautiful, but we have to add some features to make that possible, right? As I've discussed. That would cover the operator experience, who is going to be in the portal, right? An infrastructure as code practitioner is going to be in VS Code when they're deving, and they're going to be using GitHub Copilot when they're deving. But when they're operating the environment, they're checking on drift, they're checking on, the state of things, that's when they're going to be using the Azure Copilot. And that's where, if we can contextualize the fact that Terraform has deployed this resource group, Terraform has deployed these resources, and here's where the state is, here's the current state of all these things. I think that's where the Azure Copilot could really be a super cool feature. So I hope it goes in that direction.
Speaking of GitHub Copilot, there's a question about if there is a significant difference between the answers that are given if I go to the portal and I generate.
Yeah, so that's what we've spent the vast majority of our time on, is ensuring that we have high quality responses. So the GitHub handler doesn't do any, as far as I know, it's not doing any optimization from a Terraform code perspective. It's essentially giving you whatever the responses are from the model that they're using. I think it gives some good responses, but in my experience in working with it, it's probably right 50-60% of the time, and then you have to tweak it from there. What we've done is made sure that 80+% of the time you get good answers, and we'll improve that from there. So we're working hard to ensure that the Terraform responses that you get are high quality, and we'll continue to improve from there. So,
and I feel like that should be, I mean, it's good. You want GitHub Copilot and Azure Copilot to give you like the same level of quality answers. So I'm glad that's happening. Like that's a noble effort. It should happen. And if we can make the quality of the output better, we should. But I do feel like we're missing an opportunity to differentiate the dev experience from the operator experience. Devs live in VS Code and devs use GitHub Copilot. The operator, which this could be the same person, right? DevOps, right? That's kind of what we do here. So it's the same person, but they're performing their roles in kind of different modalities, right? When I'm in VS Code, I'm deving. I'm using the dev part of my hat. When I'm in Azure Portal, I'm using the operator part of my hat, right? And that's, I think, where the difference is and where the value could come from. But of course, yeah, the quality of the responses should be uniform and should be high.
And if there is any reason that is not happening and you're hitting like 40% accuracy or something like that, please reach out. And as much as you're willing to share, it's super valuable for us, because we don't want Mark to be the only person who gets 80%. We want everyone to feel that way.
Mark Gray, not Mark me.
And that is what the thumbs down is for. Don't be shy about hitting the thumbs down. If you ask a question today and it's a good response, hit the thumbs up. If you ask tomorrow and it's a bad response, hit the thumbs down. So we definitely do want that feedback from you, and we do track it very closely.
Negative feedback is the best feedback. You can't get better. So if any of you guys are reading my book, and you have negative feedback, definitely send it to me in DMs. Okay, don't go write me an Amazon review. Send it to me into my DMs, on X, on LinkedIn, on Discord, anywhere you want. That's the best way to get me negative feedback, and I want that negative feedback, but in my DMs. Now, once you give me that negative feedback in my DMs, then go write me a 5-star review on Amazon. See how that works? All right.
There's another question. Is there anything being done to ground the model that the handler runs to Terraform module documentation, so there's a minimization on hallucination of parameters?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work on that. We right now have a golden data set that we use to help ground the model. We're doing some other approaches to try to take into account the schema of the resources so that we can lock it to that. That's like I mentioned, that's a lot of the work that we're doing between now and public review, is improving that quality and making sure that the answers that we provide are valid answers. One of the ways that we are planning on doing that we have experimented with in the past, is by doing a Terraform validate. So as part of the response, we'll actually do a Terraform validate on the code. And if there's an error, we'll pass it back into the model and kind of do that iteration loop of making sure that the answer that you get is valid Terraform syntax.
That's really interesting. Now, again, I think we're well within the realm of the BSL license, right? Like this is not something that competes with HashiCorp. This is not something we charge customers for. It's free service, right? But it sounds like we are embedding Terraform Validate in there. And that's a really cool thing. That's a really cool feedback mechanism for the AI model to run Terraform Validate on the code to see how it works. Interesting points that were brought up here. Azure Verified Modules, like those modules, some of them have their own schema, like in terms of input variables, right? So it's awesome that we have that, that I think Mark called it the golden data set, where I presume, we have certain versions, of those Azure Verified Modules or the common modules that we publish. Gotta hook up with my buddy Matt White to go spelunking through all the Microsoft modules that are being developed. There's so many, but if we had some mechanism to validate that would really cut down hallucinations. I think that's an excellent point. If we have that golden data set, though, I think there's another opportunity where we could do ARM to Terraform or Bicep to Terraform conversions, right? Where we could do actual mapping between the ARM schema into Terraform resource schema. That's one killer feature that I would love to see. A second killer feature that I would love to see would then be evaluating the validity of the resource block and their parameters based on the version of the provider that you're using, right? That would be really cool. I don't know how applicable that is within this context because it's spitting out the provider block. Presumably it knows what version of the provider it's using. But I would love to see that in GitHub Copilot because that would really cut down on hallucinations when you're deving with Terraform in VS Code. It has access to your versions.tf. It should know what version of the provider you're using. It should know what's valid input parameters, existent input parameters, non-existent input parameters for the version of the resources within the version of the provider, right? That should be like the baseline feature for a Terraform AI model. And if we're keeping it uniform across GitHub Copilot and Azure Copilot, then that should just be built in there. So those would be two killer features that I hope we see.
There's a question here that I will take, but then also hand off to you. Can we do a reverse in Copilot to codify a resource? We do have a tool that doesn't necessarily use Copilot called Azure Export for Terraform. That will work on any sort of resource that has a corresponding resource in Azure RM or AZPI as a provider. So that would be a great place for you to get started. I will drop a link to the GitHub in the chat. But at the same time, Mark, is there any plans to point at a resource and tell Copilot to generate?
I think the Azure Export Tool for Terraform, I think it's a good tool. I'm glad we have it. I hope it gets better. I mentioned it in my book, chapter 16, about importing existing resources, where I talk about the different approaches that you can take, the different tools that you can take. Of course, my book covers AWS, Azure, and GCP, so I can't only look at the Azure Export Tool for Terraform. But it's one of the tools that I talk about just because of the capabilities, some of the capabilities that it has. But I think really what I'm looking for is feature parity with the existing ARM export tool that we have in the Azure portal. I want to be able to go into a resource group. I want to be able to go say export template, and I want to be able to see a tab or a radio button that says ARM and Terraform. Click Terraform, and now I want to see a TF-var file with the parameter values. And then I want to see a main.tf with the input variables and the outputs and the resources and all that stuff. And to boot, I want to see a open a GitHub code space link, right? So that I can go open in GitHub code space and run Terraform apply myself, right? That's what I want to see for existing resources. In addition to the import blocks that get automatically generated for me in that main.tf, right? I think that's what we need. Let's see what Mark Gray has to say.
Yeah, so we haven't started on it yet, but one of the things that we do expect to be able to do is kind of improve the response of the Terraform export that Stephen was talking about, where we can actually ensure that you have looping and all that kind of stuff in the export, so you actually get better quality code out of that. Right now, it takes what you have in Azure, dumps it to Terraform, and there's some static values and stuff like that, where I think adding a large language model to that could actually improve that experience. So that is definitely something worth looking at doing.
Absolutely. And by the way, like I think there is a place for the Azure export tool for Terraform because it's like this big power tool, right? Like you can like basically there's a mechanism to get it's kind of like the Eye of Sauron, right? Like that big tower that's like looking around for the hobbits, where's Frodo? And like basically the Azure export tool for Terraform is like this Eye of Sauron, and you basically need to point it at the resources that you want to import or export, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. And so you can do that by different characteristics: resource group name, subscription, tags. Kind of go over this in my book. The first step to any sort of like Terraform code generation process is a tagging strategy, where you tag things to kind of group them together to help you focus that Eye of Sauron on the right resources to collect them and put them into a Terraform workspace. I think that's where the Azure Export Tool for Terraform still has a place, still a valuable tool, but the same technology should be applied for the resource group level in the same way, or maybe for just an individual resource, in the same way that we have in the Azure portal to export an ARM template within the constructs of that whatever that Azure scope may be. And so it would be essentially a limited or a pared down version of the Azure export tool for Terraform. Whereas you can't use all these crazy tags and all these different, all the Swiss Army knife of like finding your resources. You just use the resource group or or whatever the scope is, right? And that's what you get. I think that it would be an invaluable tool, and I think it would complement the more sophisticated standalone tool that we have today, which is the Azure Export Tool for Terraform. So. Be very, very useful. And if both of these tools, the Azure portal experience and the Azure export tool for Terraform, have some component of AI that makes the code that it outputs better, more the merrier, right?
That is not on the plan for the October-November timeframe, but it is something that we are thinking about.
Another one, is there a plan to have GitHub Copilot have access to this model so there's parity? It'd be a pain to jump back and forth, I guess.
Yeah, There's not a plan for that right now, but we are in communications with the GitHub Copilot team to see what we can do to ensure that you don't have that disparity between our Copilot and kind of the GitHub Copilot. So we will let you know how we make progress there, but we don't have a plan yet on how we can kind of ensure that quality in GitHub Copilot.
Any other questions? And feel free to come off mute. Okie dokie. I think that's it on the Copilot stuff. Thank you, Mark. So
Sorry, Stephen, to interrupt you. I was writing, but it's too hard on the mobile. On the last question and in the last part, I think it would be valuable because I have a lot of engineers working for me in my team, and sometimes they have to kind of mock on our subscriptions the deployments that we want to do for customers, and this ability to export, so you mock it on a subscription and you export the Terraform. And yes, we do use the tool that you've sent here on the chat, but it would be useful if you can use this to, hey, I have this, give me the Terraform for these resources. It would be highly valuable to save you time. So I think it's an area that you should invest.
Yeah, my man Pedro. I mean, preach it, brother, preach it. I mean, Pedro's basically saying, I have people that are going in to the Azure portal and they're click to deploying, mocking the environment, like basically building out the environment, like what it's going to look like to test in their own subscription. I guess like Pedro is working at like a consulting company where they have their own subscriptions and they like dev there, and then they want to go capture that and export that and deploy it into their customer subscription. This is a perfect use case, right, for what I was just talking about, which is the export tool for Terraform in the Azure portal doesn't exist yet. I'm proposing that it should exist, right? And that's what basically I think what Pedro's asking for is like, look, I have people that go into the Azure portal, they go set up a storage account, they set up a VNet, they, drop a private endpoint, blah, blah, blah. I want them to go to the resource group, smash the export tool, the export template tool for Terraform, and copy the TFR file, the main.tf, and then be able to, redeploy it in a customer, like point it at a different customer subscription and redeploy the whole thing. That's what it sounds like he's asking for.
Yeah. So to make sure I understood you correctly, so essentially you're giving a bump to the scenario of I have some infrastructure in Azure right now. I'm going to export that to Terraform and I want that to be better quality. So having that assisted by some sort of Copilot would be an important scenario for you. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mark, it's exactly that. That will help a lot and would save us a lot of time because, as I've said, you mock your scenario, you do some experiments on your Azure subscriptions, our company Azure subscriptions. We want to do this and deploy this to a customer. I mock it on my subscriptions, something that helped me easily produce the Terraform, not with fixed values like we have now, and just, okay, I have all of the code, I can do some of the fixes manually. Okay, that's my work, and then just progress on the customer work. I think that would be highly valuable, and it would save a lot of time.
I completely agree with Pedro. It's part of the automation lifecycle, right? It's like, what do we like? Do people think that people that are in automation just sit down and just start writing the automation? No. The first thing that you have to do before you can automate something is deploy it manually, right? Right? Am I right? Like you're going to go open up the Azure portal and provision it, right? Like that's what you're going to do. And so if you provisioned it correctly the first time, it would be a wonderful time-saving tool to be able to go export that and then tweak the code. That's why we have the export tool for ARM. That's why we should have an export tool for Terraform.
So do you think, I'm not minimizing the need for this or anything, but do you think the kind of the chat experience might change or might kind of change that flow over time where the folks that work for you don't have to go into the portal and run through the kind of create experience in the portal and then try to turn that into Terraform, but rather they can essentially describe what they want in their language and have it generate the code and then apply it from there?
I think what Mark Gray's tapping into is, we have this. Are we in kind of a transient period where we have a bunch of ClickOps people that just haven't upskilled yet, right? I think that's true, right? I think there are a lot of ClickOps engineers, right, that are trying to upskill and learn automation in order to be able to start writing it from scratch, right? But I still feel that it is a common scenario, even for automation experts, even somebody such as myself. Like I'm not the best automation, engineer on the planet, but like, I'm not ashamed to say that I go and manually provision something in the portal just to see what happens. And you know what tool I use? Export tool for ARM. And I go look at the values that come out of the export tool for ARM. And those inform my coding when I go and sit down and code it from scratch in Terraform. So like if I had a tool that I could go do the same thing but export for Terraform, then it would just save me an additional step of mapping the ARM that I export to the Terraform resource, right? That would already be done for me, which would save a lot of time for me. So I get where Mark Gray's going, like where, maybe that won't go away. I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think it's a valid use case. I think people are going to continue to manually provision things the first time, especially when you're using a new service, right? Or a new feature, right? You're going to go configure it the first time. I go through this process with Terraform. Maybe I deploy like the base resource, and maybe I'm trying to provision a new configuration of a resource that I provisioned hundreds of times, right? But it's a new feature and I've never done it before. So I'll go set up the Terraform like I normally would, and I'll provision it, but then I'll go into the portal and I'll go tinker with it, learning the new features, following the documentation that's available in the portal, which is it's a good discovery tool, like to figure out how things are configured, right? Because people at Microsoft spend time in making that work and making that helpful. So I'll use that, and then I'll go make those changes, and then I'll go export, to ARM, and then I'll go and I'll go read the Terraform documentation, and I'll map what I see from the ARM template that I exported to what I think is the resource block, that's in the Terraform documentation, right? So whether it's from scratch, whether it's from an existing, like where I initially provision with infrastructure as code, and then I tweak it in the portal, I think these are all valid use cases. They're not going away. It's not a skills issue. It's actually a useful capability for discovery, for human discovery. So yeah, let's see what Pedro has to say.
Well, to be honest, most of the guys, they work on Visual Studio Code, right? But we are still, far away from that, right? Having a Visual Studio Code that I can say, hey, point at this, give me the Terraform code. If you have it on the portal, I think that's, well, probably the easiest way of having this feature for you guys to develop this feature on a more advanced experience. Visual Studio Code, or I think that's the biggest editor that most people use nowadays. That would be great, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I've mocked this here, there. Give me the Terraform, put the code on my editor, and let me continue the work.
Great. Thanks, Pedro. All right. Torquil, you're up.
Ja, Christian.
So I'm like, before we get into Torquil here, I'm still trying to process what Pedro said. I think what I heard Pedro say was like, yes, of course people use VS Code, but it's still nice to have it in the portal. Is that what you heard? If not, throw it in the comments below. Let me know what you think. But that's what I thought Pedro said. And Pedro, if you're out there, would love to hear from you. I feel like we are barking up the same tree. So would love to hear more, man. All right, let's hear what Torquil has to say.
It's regard that when you generate the code, I'm sitting and also writing a lot of Terraform, and how can you, or was it possible somehow that like you have themes in VS Code, or that you somehow could control the generated code that it has to apply to some code styles or guidelines, that it will be possible to, so when it generate it can generate following some guide. I cannot specify how to, but it is, otherwise it just becomes a code generator.
Yeah.
Where you maybe are sitting and picking or grabbing the code that it is generating, but you want to have it in another style, and it could be nice somehow if you could enforce it to create modules, for instance, in a certain way, or subdivide things in a certain way, and so if you could put some controls where you could say that it should have separation of concerns, modules and extensions which are put into modules. Nobody says that what I'm saying is what other people would like to do, but it's just that to avoid that it just becomes a kind of code generator where you look at it and then you code it in another way afterwards.
Wow, that started a certain way and then it ended a totally different way, which I think both are brilliant, right? So Torquil, great comment there. I think what Torquil was starting off saying was, what I heard was, can we enhance this to like allow me to change the coding style, right? So to me, that's like naming conventions. That's like maybe input variable preferences. There might be Mark Tinderholt style of Terraform code. There might be Torquil style Terraform code. There might be Mark Gray style Terraform code. There might be Stephen Ma style Terraform code. So is there a way like where the coding style, for a company, for a person, can be embedded within this Terraform the Azure Copilot? Hey, when you are generating Terraform code, here's like a little bit of prompt. Here's a little prompt where I can influence how the Terraform code comes out, right? That's what it sounded like it was starting off as. But then Torquil even goes deeper and says, beyond that, like, how about splitting up the files and splitting up the resources and organizing the files and organizing the resources, in a different way. And I think Torquil's more in the vein of like layering different and compartmentalizing the blast radius of different workspaces, as opposed to like just putting resources in different TF files, right? Now, in the format that we're currently looking at, where it's just a big text box you copy pasta out of, I don't see how that's really possible. But if they go with a GitHub Code Spaces thing, where it's like launch this in GitHub Code Spaces, then then they have a lot more options in terms of, I mean, folder structure, files, you know. Then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you wanted a VNet? All right, here's the networking layer in this here's the networking stack in this root module. And then here's, you know, your storage account that has a private endpoint that attaches to that network in this, you know, root module, Terraform stack, you know, whatever. And all that jazz, right? So, but I think you would need something like code spaces where you could output folder structures and multiple files, not just copy pasta from a text box. But love the idea, Torkil. I think that's where we need to get to from a code gen standpoint. And clearly we can get there with AI.
Yeah. So we do have a number of things that we have in mind along those lines. So one of the things that we heard loud and clear when we talked to customers was kind of a low-hanging fruit, if you will, is their naming schema, so they don't have to change those.
That's one thing.
That's something that we're looking into how to enable. But the other thing, as you mentioned, when we move this to VS, we should guide how I structure it. This is the naming I use. Kind of use that as a guide, and that's certainly something that we should be able to do to kind of more personalize the responses for you, so that you get, instead of a generic response, you get a response that aligns with your company expectations, essentially.
But I also think one of the key things when you do Terraform code is to understand the life cycle of the resources. And normally you want maybe to separate things, and it could also be helpful here if the Copilot the worst thing you can do is to put everything into one resource groups and just have your resources there and do it in Terraform, and suddenly when you remove something, suddenly everything is recreated. So it's also somehow that it helps you to understand the life cycle of your design, and maybe suggest you split something, because if you just have a coder with just code without really, I mean, one thing is design is not only to code and generate Terraform where it can create a resource group and a VNet and a VM, but it is maybe to say, okay, please put them into two different resource groups, or to avoid that maybe your VNet is not directly associated to the VM. I mean, that it somehow also suggests how to arrange your infrastructure so it works best for Terraform.
Interesting. Okay.
Right on. That's where I thought he was going. It started off as just like naming standards and conventions, but it, like when he said that word life cycle, I was like, yeah, it's about blast radius. It's about creating boundaries within the infrastructure that you provision that makes sense for a smattering of reasons. I cover them in my book. Next level sort of code gen would be interesting. The tricky part of that is like the thinking has not been fully canonized, right? So what Mark Tinderholt thinks about that might be different than what Torkil thinks about that, might be different than, what the Gruntwork guys think about that, right? So it's like that, it's a little bit, there's no like official canon for like, this is how Azure stuff should be split up. There's Azure design guidelines, which could be followed, which would be really cool, well architected, well architected framework, WAF, right? Those sorts of standards, I think that would be pretty cool. But from a Terraform perspective, there's no canon, right? So we would have to pick an opinion, or we'd have to make it so that we as individuals could kind of customize what we care about in terms of how to structure modules. So, and maybe we start with a default that is opinionated, and then we can tweak that opinionated. I think that we can tweak that opinion. I think that would be probably the best, until there is like written on Moses's tablets, stone tablets, like this is how Terraform modules should be organized, right? But that, just the nature of all the things that Terraform can do, different modules, it depends on the context in which the module is being developed, that can alter the design of that module. So it's very tricky. So
that sounds like a good hard problem for us to think about.
Yeah, because we have put a lot of effort. When we started Terraform, it was a bit naive, and we was not really aware about all these side effects you can have if you are putting things too much, cluster them too much together. So now we have network separated from and subnets and things like this, and we have VMs in special resource groups. We have the NAT gateway somewhere else, and we have things when you code, you like to have small modules so that you easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to change. And it could be nice if your Copilot somehow it could actually try to say to you, this is a bad composition.
Yeah.
Because if you do this, then next time you do a change, suddenly it recreates too many infrastructure components, maybe even your database, and this you don't want.
Yeah.
Really great insights there. And again, the level of granularity that people go to in modules varies, right? What Torkel was describing there might be a little bit too granular for like myself. But different strokes for different folks, like people have different opinions about how they want to organize things. So, and a lot of it is the context in which it's being developed. The organization, that's maintaining this infrastructure also influences the module composition. So it's complex. It's opinionated.
Awesome. Love the feedback. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Dominic.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about generating Terraform from existing resources, and that's been an area that I've been focusing on. And unfortunately, I forgot to get my manager's permission before this meeting, so I won't be sharing my screen, but I've shared in the chat a link to the GitHub repo where I've been working on a tool for doing this, taking existing resources and generating Terraform from them. And under the GitHub releases, there should be a Windows and Linux binary for this. But the gist of it is that through PowerShell, I had originally created some workflows for listing all the resource groups and then dynamically creating the import blocks for them. So like import and then ID of the resource group, and then 2 equals some auto-generated name, and then running the command that takes those import blocks and generates the Terraform from them. And I did that with PowerShell, and I found that didn't scale appropriately. So I've rewritten the thing in Rust, and now it's a general kind of pattern of pointing it at existing cloud resources and trying to generate more human-style Terraform, because I've noticed that with the AZTF export tool, it works, but it takes a while to do its thing, and it will generate like resource 0, resource 1, resource 2. So the naming isn't as one would have done if they were to write it as a human. So I've tried to make my tool follow a little bit more of a human pattern, where the first step is deciding what you want to import. So there's been talk about you don't want to put everything in one resource group, and the same thing kind of applies. You don't want to put all your Terraform resources in one folder, because then every apply command takes 30 minutes for it to check every resource that you've declared.
But that's why the Azure Export Tool for Terraform has such a sophisticated, Eye of Sauron that can be configured with a number of different characteristics about resources to kind of like focus in on just the hobbits that it's looking for, right? By hobbits, I mean, Azure resources, of course. the best way to do that is through thoughtful, transformational tagging, right? You should be, if you have a large environment that you plan on importing and generating Terraform code, you should be spending time thinking through how you want to organize them into modules, and you should be tagging those resources accordingly using identifiers that will essentially be used to scoop those resources into a Terraform root module ultimately, right? And Azure Export Tool for Terraform allows you to do that. Could Azure Export Tool for Terraform have better human readable code? Absolutely. I think if we embedded ChatGPT, OpenAI into the export tool for Terraform, it could get a lot better at that. So I agree with his criticisms there. Yeah, there is a tool that does this, and like Azure Export Tool for Terraform does generate like the import blocks and even generate state files and things like that. So I think it does this stuff already. It's interesting. This gentleman is like building his own in PowerShell or Rust, I guess. And to each their own. Like if he wants to go do that. But I'm gonna have to check out his GitHub link to see what that's all about. But interesting.
So being able to optionally import everything, or just pick, like, I want to import these 3 resource groups that share a common concern, but may not even be from the same subscription. The tool is designed so that it's will quickly be able to list all the resources. So one of the things that Terraform does is when you run apply or whatever, it does the check to see if everything matches. So it's saying, you're talking about 6 resource groups. I'm going to go individually check each of those. But instead, using the Azure CLI, I just list all the resource groups, or use the graph, because sometimes the graph is faster than the Python CLI, to list everything, so that when you want to import a resource group, they're just all available there. It doesn't have to iterate through all the subscriptions and take a while. And it's kind of a multi-step process, because when you get the generated code, even after running the import blocks, it's not without flaws. So if you import a role assignment, then the generated code has both the role definition ID and the role name. So it could say contributor or /subscription /whatever /contributor, and that fails Terraform validate, because you can only have one of those properties. So as part of the cleanup step, after generating this code, there's a bunch of kind of linter whatever, where it will prune the properties that fail the Terraform validate. So if you have role assignments that it's imported, it will prefer the role definition name over the hard-coded ID, just because that's like the human way to write it. And similar for security groups, it will comment out when the members or the owners is an empty array, because that's also invalid. And the other thing is that for security groups, when you declare members within the security group definition, it expects a list of object ID strings. So instead, using the Azure AD users data block, you can specify a list of user principal names. So by dynamically determining all the object IDs that you've referenced in the imported security groups, it creates one big users block that looks up all those users. And then using a local block, it creates a dictionary where the key is the email and the value is the object ID. And then for each of the security group definitions, it does a substitution. So instead of saying members equals and then a list of strings that are just object IDs, it's a list of references within that map, so that you see the email of the users, and it all works out so that when you run Terraform plan or apply, it will dereference all of those details. So it's trying to approximate the human written code from the generated code. And this is multiple kind of incentives for doing it this way. One of them is just like disaster recovery. If you have a bunch of infrastructure that you've created.
So I totally on board with what he's saying. The question is, do we invest human cycles to develop all this logic, this bespoke logic to, that really is going to cascade across potentially every resource in the Azure RM provider, or do we use AI to help us like scale, right? And I applaud his effort in like going and implementing like all those cases himself. But I think a more scalable approach is going to be using AI to kind of to smooth those edges for us. Now, how do we do that in a standalone client-side tool like Azure Export for Terraform? Don't know, because running OpenAI to do this processing costs money. So I mean, if it was built into Azure Copilot and it was exported to a more robust code template viewer like GitHub Code Spaces, then now we're talking, right? Anyways, let's see what else he has to say.
Through ClickOps and you don't have the code for, then as people have mentioned, you want to be able to just point something at it and get all your Terraform for it. And the strategy for this has been pretty good. I've taken this approach for some of the role assignments and like security group stuff at a specific area of our tenant and exported it as Terraform, and then created a pipeline that runs every day and says, is there changes detected? So that if a user gets removed from the org or added to a security group, then that results in drift that the pipeline then notices. And currently that's a manual process where the pipeline will fail just to let us know, and then we have to fix it in the repo. But I'm looking forward to the future for creating some kind of interface for a conflict resolution. So instead of a textual diff, it'd be a more attribute based and says, a user has been added to this group or a user was removed from this group. Do you want to keep this change or do you want to revert it, kind of thing? So that's something I've been working on, and hopefully I'll be able to share some slides and some demos in the future.
That definitely sounds pretty cool. Like, how do we reconcile drift in an automated fashion? And how do we inject kind of approval gates into these automated like code updaters, right? Like we're basically going to pre-commit, into source control like after some approval gate has passed. So pretty interesting scenarios. I wish I knew what it looks like his last name's Phillips, but I don't know what maybe his first name starts with a D. I don't know. But if you're out there, Phillips, shoot me a note in the comments below. Would love to see more about what you're doing. I'm definitely going to go check your GitHub that I think you shared in the chat. So
Awesome.
That's what I was going to say, Dominic. I'm like, hey, I work on Azure Export for Terraform, and I'm impressed. So can you come and talk about this for 30 minutes? Because it does sound really, really cool. So
yeah, I will make sure to run it by my manager, and then I'll get some demos set up for sure.
Okay. Let's get this guy working on the Azure Export Tool for Terraform. Like, let's go. Come on, Phillips, Phillips. Let's go, man.
Okay. We'll follow up with you then.
Perfect.
Just don't do it in PowerShell. Oh, he converted to Rust. Good man. I don't even know what Rust is, but yeah, it's not PowerShell.
Javier? Or Mark, were you going to say something? Okay.
Nope, just was going to ask Javier.
I put my question in the chat also, but just wanted to ask if you guys were looking at or doing any work on like visual representations of the Terraform, having that be I know there were some projects that we did with Bicep and ARM that were visualizers that, did a good job at least of showing relationships. I know there's some really good tools on the no code side that do a good job of also kind of, showing properties and things. Is there anything that you guys are exploring with that?
Thank you for bringing that up. It is something that I certainly, or we certainly have in mind. We don't have anything imminent or anything like that, but it's definitely something that we understand how customers work, and they diagrams would make things a lot easier. So it is something that we're thinking about, but nothing we're going to deliver in the the next few months or anything.
And honestly, like, is it really like in scope for us, right? I kind of look to HashiCorp in this department, or other third parties, like there's a couple out there that do this, like Brainboard and Structura.io. I met those guys at reInvent, and very, very cool solutions. The Structura.io demo that I got, I mean, they loaded they loaded some pretty sophisticated modules that I had without breaking a sweat. Showed all the relationships. They were drag and droppable. Me personally, like, I wouldn't want to edit in that type of an environment, which I see like the Brainboard folks kind of pushing a lot. But I definitely see the value from a visualization standpoint, just because, I mean, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, and not everybody is wired to go look in VS Code and splunk through all the code. And frankly, some of the Terraform repos that I do code reviews for, not Dan Kitch. Dan Kitch is really good, but some of the code reviews I've done in the past, it's like the Spider-Man meme. It's like, all these resources and inversion of control and locals referencing, dynamic for expressions. It's like, grab the duct tape. My head's about to explode, guys, So having a visualizer would be really great. But I don't know. I don't know if this is our problem to solve, or if this is like, I would look to HashiCorp to show leadership here. Either provide a marketplace for Terraform Cloud to surface value add third parties like Structura.io or Brainboard to provide visualizers like this, and find a way to cultivate this type of innovation from third parties. I think that's something that HashiCorp needs to figure out how to do. And Armin, if you're out there, would be happy to share my thoughts on how this might be possible. So. Anyways, let's see what else we have to say here.
For diagrams, there is the...
I was added for a non-committal answer, Javier.
There's
true politician's answer. There you go, Mark Gray. Attaboy.
I mean, just wanted to see where you guys are thinking on it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it is something that we understand the value for it. It's a hard problem, but it's something that we would love to deliver.
It's a hard problem, but there's people that have solved it, right? So why not just like figure out a way to, leverage what's out there? Yeah. The can't we all just get along? That's my philosophy.
Sorry, Dominic,
there is a Terraform graph command that can export a primitive kind of markup of
the graph command is so it's so cringe. It's like an old UML document, like in PNG format. But D Phillips here is correct. There is a command in the CLI. Don't use it. It's nasty. Really do not recommend.
Stuff, and then you can render it with, I think Pandoc has a renderer or something, but I've found it to not be kind of the greatest. So in addition to the tool I'm making,
absolutely, we agree on that.
I'm also trying to create a visualizer.
Ooh.
So my initial thoughts are just creating like a force directed graph where you have a node for each resource group and subscription and kind of go from there.
Yeah, great ideas.
One random thing that I need to make sure we talk about. So Mark, how do we use the Copilot today? Is it just through the Azure Copilot portal, or is there anywhere else that I can go and get those handler results?
No, right now it's only through the Azure portal. So you click the Copilot button in there like I showed at the beginning, and that's the only access you have to it right now.
And do I need to like sign up for a preview or anything, or is it just auto rolled out for me?
It's auto rolled out, but my understanding is that organizations have control over it. So there's a certain percentage of Azure customers that have it enabled, but then the organization that it's enabled for can kind of disable it if they choose. So if they don't want their customers to use it for security reasons or whatever, they can disable it. So,
Which right now it's not referencing any existing resources, so you're just generating code from scratch. I don't know why anybody would disable it, but eventually maybe it will.
and that is all or nothing. So it is either you have access to Azure Copilot or you don't. They can't control the individual handlers that you have access to inside of that.
Got it. We have a lot of interesting diagram, visualize, AZ-Viz things.
So
in the chat.
definitely a lot of open source and tools out there to do that right now.
All right. We have about 15 minutes left. The floor is open. So if you have anything you want to talk about or bring up as a topic for the product team or for folks in the group, now's the time. So,
Well, if nobody else speaks, then I just want to say that's a very good idea that you guys have this monthly schedule that we change ideas here. So kudos for you guys.
glad you like the new schedule. We're hoping that this will help people attend more frequently too, because now they know, okay, it's going to be this time. So it's on the calendar weeks in advance. Torkel?
Unfortunately for me, it was weeks in advance while I was in China. So,
Yeah. Sorry. Maybe it's hard to answer this question, but what do you think about this Terraform OpenTofu? I mean, there's this clone of Terraform, and can it affect? I mean, the Copilot could be trained in both dialects, maybe depending on how the world is moving. I'm personally for Terraform, but yeah.
oh no, Torkel, you had to bring up the soybean farmers. Come on.
It can be others are for OpenTofu. I don't know, but it's and you don't know where things are moving. It depends on how the community and support and things like this.
From our perspective, we're close partners with HashiCorp. We work with them almost every day. So we are committed to supporting Terraform. My understanding is that OpenTofu is a drop-in replacement for Terraform. So all of this code that we generate for Terraform should work just fine with OpenTofu. So if
Today.
customers choose to use OpenTofu, the work that we're doing here should help them as well. The Terraform export, the AI stuff that we're doing, all of that should just work.
Yeah, the modules I develop on my channel, I will work with OpenTofu as well. There's today, no guarantee that in the future. Yeah, so.
If I can give my input on that, my company is about 8K engineers. We have a huge code base for Terraform, and of course we've heard about OpenTofu and we've explored it, but let's be honest, we have so many big companies worldwide where we are using Terraform that it simply doesn't make sense now to change to OpenTofu. So you also have to think about your customers. What do you say to your customer? Hey, we've promoted the usage of Terraform for so many years, and we've used it on all of our deployments, and now we're going to OpenTofu just because. It's not easy, right?
No.
Yeah, I mean, just because. I think that sums it up. Just because. There's really no reason to move to OpenTofu. Unless there are two reasons. One, you want to use one of the T++ operators, right? They're the guys that did the OpenTF manifesto. You know, they're the guys that are paying for OpenTofu to be developed. They're the guys that heckled me on LinkedIn. Okay. So if you want to use one of their, for-profit services, then yeah, you got to go OpenTofu. If you want to build a competing product like a T++, you want to build your own T++ operator and compete with those guys. They're all working together, which is really interesting. All these competitors are working together to, fork Terraform, just for themselves, just so that they can use it. That's the second reason, right? So other than that, it's just because, and the just because is usually comes down to, are you a capital O, capital S open source zealot, right? Like, do you have a seizure? Like when you use, does it morally offend you to use source available software, which is essentially open source? It's just, there's a somewhat limited licensing provision about, hey, you can't like take our thing and then go compete with us, right? And do the exact same thing that we're trying to do with the thing that we develop. Thank you very much. If you get butthurt about that, then you're in that camp as well. And for me, in my opinion, that reason falls under just because. And if you watch the people that proliferate this, they fall into those two camps, right? They're either the T++ operators, or they are open source, capital O, capital S zealots that are just deeply offended by the HashiCorp's transition to the BSL license, which I think is an extremely permissive license. I still use the community edition of Terraform, and I still use it for free. I have no problem with it. If HashiCorp were to ever get rid of the community edition, I would have a reason, to go to OpenTofu. But I don't see that day. I don't see that day coming. There's no incentive for HashiCorp to do that. Which, a good predictor of the future is what incentives there are, assuming people act rationally, which is not always a safe assumption, right? But assuming people act rationally, people are going to follow their incentives, right? So HashiCorp has no incentive to getting rid of the community edition. The community edition is the gateway drug to their for-profit offerings. Terraform Cloud, Terraform Enterprise. That's the front door. That's how they get feet in the door. There's no way they're going to get rid of the community edition, because then people won't come, right? People won't use their tool. People won't fall in love with their tool, and then want more. The HashiCorp's transition to the BSL was really just about like, hey, you guys are eating our lunch. Please don't eat our lunch. If you want to help us out, you can continue to use it, but you got to work with us on a commercial license, right? And not a single one of the T++ operators talked to HashiCorp about what those terms might look like. They went ballistic, they went nuclear, and they forked. And that's just the path that they chose. It's very unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Oh, and you can say Microsoft is trying to uncover or motivate you to use Bicep. Others are on Terraform, and it's a kind of community things. If developers somehow find some references, something. I'm not saying we are also for Terraform. I like Terraform, but I just say that there's some shifts, some changes, and then I just want to hear just an opinion around these kind of things, also in regard to support. If the Copilot could be trained in different in different languages, and by that way you ask Terraform, the code generator, when it generates codes, I would like to have it in OpenTofu. I would like to have it in plain Terraform in according to some specific version. And so you can actually set some indication of flags, your preferred version dialog. Yeah.
Not from an OpenTofu perspective, because like I said, it should just be the same syntax. We are doing that, we are doing that for our different providers. So our current responses are all using Azure RM. But as part of our public preview, or actually our next release, will support AZ API as well. So like you suggest there, we will give the user the ability to say, I want a response to be in Azure RM or AZ API or what have you. So it should, that could be extended to other languages and stuff like that as well. So.
Yeah, and there's only so many resources we can dedicate as a company, and I'm kind of thinking as as a personified version of Microsoft here. I'm not speaking on behalf of Microsoft. I'm just trying to interpret our strategy here, right, as I see it. My personal opinion. That's a huge disclaimer, everybody. But if you look at the tools that were on the first slide, right, they were all first-party Microsoft tools, except for Terraform. Now, Torkill's making the point hey, can we ask it for OpenTofu code, right? Well, that's the thing is this is a fact, right? Microsoft has made a decision to support Terraform, and it is the only third-party infrastructure as code tool that we support, right? We are dedicating FTEs, the likes of Matt White, Stephen Ma, Mark Gray here that are focused on Terraform. We can't do that for every third-party infrastructure as code tool out there. The reason why we're doing it with Terraform, I presume, is because Terraform is insanely popular. People love it. I love it. A lot of people love it. So that's why it's getting the investment. We have a great partnership with HashiCorp. And even now under, when the deal hasn't closed yet between IBM and HashiCorp, we have a great partnership with IBM, right? We have first-party managed services like Red Hat OpenShift, right, for Azure. So we can't boil the ocean. If there are other infrastructure as code tools that are as popular as Terraform, for example, if Pulumi became extremely popular, we would have to make a decision are we going to support Pulumi now, right? It would be a business decision, right? But we can't just support every infrastructure as code tool out there on the market. So that's the way it is.
And I think the thing is right, we are trying to support customers for whatever workflows they need. And like Mark mentioned, OpenTofu right now, syntactically and implementation-wise, is very similar to pre-existing Terraform. So it's really a smoke and mirrors thing if we say, OpenTofu or Terraform, it's the same code. So if you want to use it, you're totally empowered to.
For now. OpenTofu has been developing some new features instead of just chasing the coattails of Terraform. And so that may not be the case, right? OpenTofu now has .tofu extension files. So as they innovate and they go their own way, and I encourage them to do that, go innovate, go do your own thing. That's what you said you're going to go do. And I applaud them for that. It may not always be a completely transparent change, right? It is today. That is true, as I understand it. But it may not always be that way. So there's no guarantees of that, but it does work today.
Actually, from the perspective of our providers, OpenTofu, from my understanding, actually uses the same providers. So they just have a fork of the providers that they update on a regular basis. So the responses that we give, other than language syntax and stuff like that, the resources and their schema are identical.
And that is partially true. So OpenTofu has forked many of the main big providers, but they don't fork them for the purpose of maintaining them separately. Those, many people may not realize this, but those providers are still MPL. Those providers, the AWS provider, the Azure provider, those are not under the BSL license. Only the Terraform core executable and other libraries and things like that won't go into that detail here. But the providers are still open source, so the T++ operators are still free to use them. So the reason why they forked them, it's more of a mechanics thing about how to get those providers into the OpenTofu registry. So there's some things that they have to do for the OpenTofu registry where they need to make some small code changes in the repo in order to enable the OpenTofu, those providers to be published to the OpenTofu registry. But my understanding is that's the whole purpose of those forks. And all they do is they just pull the updates, from the original repos into their forks for the providers. That's all that they're doing, and they're free to do that, right? Because those providers are still MPL. They're not under the BSL. So, yeah, thought it interesting tidbit there.
Yeah, good.
Jason?
Yeah, so kind of thinking about Azure Verified Modules a little bit and trying to walk a walk of introducing those, but having had an issue with CAP Terraform module, like external module adoption. I just want to make sure that you guys are still, that's live and vibrant and going and growing and all that good stuff. And then was also wondering if maybe you guys would be interested in doing any kind of back conversation around your engineering criteria or the way that you create modules and the reasons why you do it that way. Maybe a YouTube video or something along those lines that kind of articulates that so that we could show that to management and get further adoption.
Calling Matt White.
Those type of things on the verified modules. I'm just kind of curious. I didn't hear anything today about that.
So, sorry, what were you asking for from the verified modules again? Kind of more.
Is it alive and going, and are you still there? There was a lot of conversation around it earlier.
Gotcha. So to give a very high level update. So we started out on a mission to enable or to create Terraform verified modules. We made some progress on that. And as our team that works closely with customers, so the customer success team started working with customers wanted the flexibility to have that same modularization for Terraform and Bicep. So that team has actually taken over that initiative. So there's an Azure Verified Modules, which is you can get to here.
And I've been seeing the updates on LinkedIn, and usually the Bicep and the Terraform modules are released in tandem. So in my head, when I hear Azure Verified Modules, I see, I'm at the ice cream shop and there's two flavors, Bicep and Terraform, right? I mean, that's what goes through my head. So I always do that translation. Azure Verified Modules, pick your flavor, Bicep or Terraform.
Which has, I think for Terraform now we have about 50 verified modules, and they are covering a whole bunch of different things. They include best practices from a WAF perspective and those types of things. So they've really taken what we started and are running with it. And it is being contributed to by internal Microsoft folks as well as external folks. So if any of you are interested in contributing, there's in that link that I provided there's guidance on how to do that as well. So there are.
And I think that's the Matt White, Jared Holdgate kind of crew. If I'm if I'm
Always interested in getting that kind of help, essentially.
And then you guys had a in your documentation for AVM, you have some guidelines or some developer guidelines. Would you have any kind of YouTube or anything that kind of walks through? I know you guys have documented them. Kudos for that. But anything that kind of goes through how you came to those determinations and what pitfalls or whatever led you to building those guidelines? Anything along those lines?
I don't think we have anything like that right now. I can work with the AVM team and see if that's something that we can put together. But from a kind of a high level perspective, like I mentioned, this team actually works with customers on a regular basis. And they have consolidated the kind of practices and philosophies and stuff like that they have when working with customers into these modules.
Okay.
And they've given
Thank you.
talks before, Jason, about how they kind of build these modules out and what sort of pipelines are involved and the sort of decision trees that are there. But in terms of walking through everything step by step, like Mark said, I don't think there's something there, but there is a lot of content that they've put out, even on our own YouTube channel, about the verified modules and how that whole process works. So.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I'll
they
go
did
back
a
and look again.
they did a good session at the last HashiConf, at HashiConf 2023. So I
Matt White, paging Matt White.
think all of that stuff is posted to YouTube. So if you take a look or look for Matt White, or maybe someone just posted that. Yeah, so that'll give you a good overview of those and kind of the flow through that. So
Wonderful. Thank you.
Quick question here. Do we have contacts with the Radius team? Actually, there was someone who was on the call who worked pretty regularly with Radius. I don't know if, Mark, you have any contact with them, but we've talked to them maybe like once or twice. Jeffrey, if you want to follow up with us and send an email about what you're curious about, we can forward that to the team if you're interested or wanting them to get to have conversations with them.
I plan on exploring Radius on my channel this hopefully this year, maybe next year, but we'll see. It's been a busy year. If that interests you and you want to see me tackle Radius, smash the like button and leave a comment leave a comment below.
All right, we have a few minutes left. Any other topics or questions or comments? Going once, going twice. And that seems to be a great first monthly call. So thank you everybody for joining. This was a lot of fun and really appreciate the enthusiasm from folks. Absolutely would encourage everyone to come again and bring any of your questions and your things that you want to bring up. And we'll be here at the same time next month. So have a great rest of your August and see you in September.
Thank you.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
So that's it. Great call, man. We hit a lot of different topics. Azure Copilot, which is a new feature, which I think it's early on, but I think it has a lot of potential, especially if we go in that more operator direction. I think that's pretty cool. We touched on visualizers for Terraform, like who's going to do that. Azure Verified Modules, OpenTofu was brought up. It was an interesting community call. Really good, insightful comments. I love hearing from customers like Pedro and Torquil. I think those types of people, are the real practitioners that are out there, that are using Terraform to solve their customers' problems. And I think we should definitely be listening to those people. So I'm super excited that we're going to have this call more frequently and on the regular. I just got to show up because I just love to contribute and hang out with you guys. on that call. And yeah, we'll see if Stephen Ma and Mark Gray can tolerate me. But yeah, anyways, great comments, great questions, great suggestions. Can't wait for September. If you enjoyed my reaction, this is kind of like my first reaction video. I wasn't able to make the call, so I kind of had to watch it after the fact. So this was like my raw feedback about what was shown today and what people were talking about today. Hope you guys found it useful. I don't know if I'm going to do this like when I actually attend the call, because I'm usually pretty vocal on the call anyway. But I thought since I couldn't make it today, I thought I'd do this reaction video just to throw my thoughts out there and my responses and see what you guys thought about today's call as well. So, anyways, if you like this content, please smash that like button and throw a comment down below what you thought about the call today, what you thought about my thoughts, any old thing under the sun. Would love to hear from you. And if you want to hear more about Azure and Terraform, smash that subscribe button and ring that little bell so you know when my next video drops. Until then, this is the Azure Terraformer signing off.